Welcome back into the Dynasty Nerds YouTube page. I am your host, Garret Price, and I am very excited to bring in my good friend, Andrew Mott. Now, Andrew, I was trying to remember, is this the first show you've done with Nerds, or did we have you on once like a year or two ago?
No, this is the first show. We've done a couple shows together on my channel, but this is my first time being over here on the Nerds channel.
Nice, nice. Well, I'm excited to have you in here. I know that you were with BDGE for a while. You have your own company. Real quick, before we get into this awesome topic that we have today, covering vets versus rookies and who we'd rather take, tell me a little bit about like your background and what you've been doing in the fantasy space.
Yeah, I mean, I really was just a guy who played fantasy football, very, I would say, intensely, in my home leagues and things like that for a long period of time. And my background is in content creation. I have a film degree. Uh, got a degree in digital media. Like I've worked in film studios. And so I had friends back home that were like, hey, you're kind of kicking our butt in fantasy football and you do the content stuff. Why don't you just start making the videos for it? And it's something that I had played around with for a period in time. I used to do a podcast for our home league, our redraft league back home, for high school friends and stuff like that. So I was already kind of doing the content, but it was like, hey, just switch this and do it for everybody. And that's kind of when I made the switch. So been doing that. Have my channel, the League FFB, is really what I've had as like my little baby over the last couple of years. Been in the space now for about 2.5. This is going to be my third NFL season that I am covering. So yeah, it's been really fun. It's been a grind, but a good grind, it's something that you put a lot of time into because you care about it.
Love it, love it. All right, well, let's get into the show topic today. So, like I mentioned, we're going to be doing rookies versus vets. I'm going to give you two guys that have relatively close ADP, and you're going to tell me which guy you would rather have in a startup. So we're gonna look at it from a startup perspective, because obviously some of these it's a lot easier if it's like it's rebuild. Okay, I'm going to take the rookie, or if I'm a contender, yeah, I'm going to take the vet, but in a startup perspective, you're on the clock and you're looking these two players right in the face. You're like, who would I rather have on my team? So let's start with the first one here. We're going to start at the running back position here. Would you rather have Omarion Hampton, running back 5 in our current ADP, or De'Von Achane, running back 6 in our current ADP? And I'll be honest, this one got even a little trickier potentially, depending on which way you're leaning over the weekend with the news of the Jonnu Smith trade and stuff. So, who would you rather have in your dynasty startup?
Yeah, I it actually got a little bit easier for me with the Jonnu
Okay.
trade. So because of that, I was already leaning De'Von Achane. When I'm looking at my rankings, Omarion Hampton currently is my running back 5. Achane is my running back 4. So I have them back to back. I do prefer Achane. And for the record, before I really get into the pro Achane argument for me, there is no wrong answer with this one. Like I would happily take both of these
Sure.
guys on any team that I'm on. But I just feel like Achane has a massive fantasy football ceiling, this year and moving forward. I think he's really a guy that, we think of Gibbs and Bijan and Saquon and these guys that all can be the running back one for fantasy football. But I think De'Von Achane also is a dark horse candidate for that potential spot as well. Last year, number 1 in running back receptions. He was the number 1 running back as well in first read targets. So they were really looking at him in the receiving game. He had 9 top 10 finishes. 4 of those were top 5 finishes. And keep in mind, he was dealing with a bad Miami situation last year for the most part, with Tua off of the football field, Tyreek injured, a whole bunch of stuff going on there in Miami. Now, that's kind of the story, I guess, to why you could argue against De'Von Achane, is because when you look at those splits with and without Tua last year, he was averaging 20 fantasy points per game when Tua was on the football field. When Tua was off the football field, 7 fantasy points per game. So that's a drastic difference. And that's probably why you look at last year and say, yeah, he was good. He wasn't great. The thing is, when the Miami Dolphins were healthy, when everybody was on the football field, he was elite. It's just how often are we going to get that Tua Tagovailoa being healthy? And I've kind of been a guy that's buying into the dip a tiny bit on Tua right now. I just feel like the community's faded him and faded this Miami Dolphins offense. So I'm going Achane. I think he has as elite of a ceiling as they come, and he's a player that I'm still comfortable with on my fantasy football teams, despite some of that risk that may possess with him.
Man, this was arguably like the first one I did was the hardest one for me, because I went back and forth like 3 or 4 times they're like, I'm going to go Hampton. No, I'm going to go Achane. No, I'm going to go Hampton. No, I kept going back and forth, and I was waffling. And even as you're talking, I'm waffling back and forth. But I think I lean just ever so slightly. If I have 100 teams, I'm going to have 51 of Omarion Hampton. It's razor thin. The thing that makes the difference for me is you look at what this Chargers offense wants to do, and at their core, they are a running football team. They want to get the ball to their running backs. We saw what J.K. Dobbins, a guy that is not the same explosive athlete that he was coming out due to all of the injuries and things like that. And he was putting up running back 1 numbers at the beginning of the season. I mean, he was just looking absolutely fantastic. This is a really good offensive line that honestly probably improved over the offseason as well. You have arguably 2 of the best tackles in the game. They improved the middle of their offensive line. And I think this is just a team that's ascending. It would not shock me within the next couple of years if we got a 15, 16, 1,700 rushing yard season out of a guy like Omarion Hampton. Probably not this season with Najee Harris there, but within the next couple of years after that, I think we could see that. And I think we're also sleeping a little bit too on the potential receiving upside of this position. We've seen Justin Herbert more than willing to check down to the running back. We had all those years of Austin Eckler having monster numbers. So I'm not ready to just say like, oh, it's only going to be a ground game attack. I think we could long-term see some receiving upside as well. And this is no knock on Achane, especially when Jonnu Smith was gone. That was my biggest worry long-term was, is there enough targets to go around for everybody? And then you add in a few different things, but it was close. I do hope that this offensive line is better for Miami this year. That's another concern for me. So it's just enough for me to pick Hampton. But man, you're right. This one for me was probably the most difficult. Let's move to the wide receiver position here. Wide receiver 14, Travis Hunter, or wide receiver 13, Garrett Wilson.
Yeah, this one was one of the ones that you said you were going back and forth last grouping of guys. I was kind of the same way with this one. I think I'm going to lean Garrett Wilson here. When I reference my rankings, I have Hunter at 16. I have Garrett Wilson at 14. The age isn't a major, differentiator for me because at 22 years old for Hunter and 24 for Wilson, I still feel like I have tons of elite years, for both of these guys potentially in the next couple of seasons. But when I look at Garrett Wilson, man, it has been up and down. It's been a little bit rough because of the quarterback play. He hasn't had, the right guy or the right situation come in. You have, Zach Wilson for a period of years. Then you have Aaron Rodgers come in and, Aaron Rodgers wants to bring his buddy Devontae Adams. So now Garrett Wilson is moving outside and Adams is in the slot. Now, despite all of that, he's seen 469 targets in the last 3 seasons. So he has been an absolute target hog. I think he's going to be a guy that can see 140 plus targets again here in 2025 with Justin Fields there. You bring in that extra chemistry there from their college days there at Ohio State. I think there's a chance that we can kind of unlock a little bit more of those elite traits that we've seen from Garrett Wilson in years past. And really when I'm looking at how he's performed, despite some of these rough situations I think Garrett Wilson has been in, he's still always been an elite separator. 94th percentile versus man, 86th versus press, 82nd versus zone. This is a guy who just gets open, and it gets open often. Even though top 5 is probably unlikely right now with the way that quarterback situation is and that room is set up in general, I still think he's going to give you these fringe wide receiver 1 type of volume, those types of numbers. And I still think that there's probably a little bit of a safer floor. And Travis Hunter is a guy that I like. But overall, you look at that situation too, you got to compete with Brian Thomas Jr. You have an offense here that we're hoping Trevor Lawrence ends up taking that step forward. So even though you might prefer Trevor Lawrence to Justin Fields, how good actually is he, how much better is he actually than Justin Fields for fantasy right now? We hope he takes that step forward with Liam Cohen, and I'll probably talk about that a little bit later. But at the end of the day, it's just, I'm going Garrett Wilson. I think we've seen a little bit of that elite ceiling already, and there's just no target competition there. Josh Reynolds, Malachi Corley, we could name all of these guys that probably belong on third string depth charts, but those are the starters for the New York Jets.
Yeah, I'm with you. I went with Garrett Wilson on this one as well. I went with the vet side on this one, and everything you said I think is absolutely spot on. You look at Justin Fields, and I know a lot of people see that as a negative for a guy like Garrett Wilson, but I think we quickly forget that DJ Moore had his best season of his career with Justin Fields in a very similar type of situation where it was DJ Moore, and then there was really nobody else to throw the football to. I think Justin Fields is a smart quarterback. I think he knows where his bread's going to be buttered, and I think he's going to consistently be looking for this guy. So I'm with you there. I think we're going to get a ton of targets. Sneaky though, Mason Taylor though in this offense could be seeing a lot of targets as well. So we'll have to wait and see on that. All right, let's do another wide receiver here. Let's go to Jayden Higgins, wide receiver 39, or Josh Downs, wide receiver 44.
Yeah, this one was I think this one is tied for the toughest one of all of the guys we've talked about
Okay.
today. I'm gonna lean the vet here in Josh Downs, and I know I've leaned the vet in pretty much all of them so far, but I'm gonna lean it again. Really, when I'm looking at Downs, I don't like the Indy quarterback play. I don't think anybody loves the Indy quarterback play, and I think that's really what's limiting this upside in the short term. I do think he is the long-term slot guy there in Indianapolis. You know, he had a 26% target share last year when he was healthy. So we like to see that when he's on the football field, he's a guy that's getting the football pretty often. It's also another guy, you know, I talked about success rates for Garrett Wilson, 90th percentile versus man for Josh Downs in 2 straight years. The other guys who have done that are all guys that we consider elite. Josh Downs is one of the guys that we don't consider elite yet, I think, at this point in time. And maybe that's just because of the quarterback play. And not only that, you know, this is a little bit of a smaller wide receiver, but he's also excelled at contested catch. He, you know, has
Yes.
caught 70% of the contested catches that have come his way in 2024. So I really do like Jayden Higgins. I think he's a player that I would probably be, you know, you said 51 and 49. I think
Yeah.
I'd probably go like 55 Josh Downs and 45 Jayden Higgins, but I think I'm going to take Downs just because I think we've seen a little bit of those flashes where there's just so much potential that can be unlocked with Josh Downs. And I do actually believe Daniel Jones is probably going to be the starter for a majority of the year this year. Like that's the way that I am operating with this. And we've seen him pepper, you know, much less wide receivers in the slot like Wan'Dale Robinson with a bajillion targets before. And if he does that with Josh Downs can, I think, absolutely feast.
No, we're in lockstep on this one as well. So you're 3 vets, no rookies. I'm 1 rookie, 2 vets so far, but I'm with you on Josh Downs. I actually have his ADP is wide receiver 44. I have him right now as my wide receiver 33. So I think he's being just crazy undervalued right now. I do believe that he's a player that his talent dictates he should be higher. And in non-Anthony Richardson games last year, he was averaging around 15 points a game. That would put you in wide receiver 1 territory. So if he is able to do that this year, it's going to either be because Daniel Jones is the quarterback or Anthony Richardson stepped it up and is playing better and completing more than, less than half of his passes. He's closer to 60% of his passes, something like that. So either way, I just don't see a scenario where it's worse for Josh Downs. And I think we're going to get much better play. He's a guy that could ascend several tiers in people's rankings this offseason. So definitely very interested in Josh Downs. All right, let's go to the quarterback position here. The number 1 overall pick in the draft this year, Cam Ward, quarterback 16, versus a guy that was the number 1 overall pick a few years ago in Trevor Lawrence, quarterback 18. So you go in the rookie or you go in the vet here?
Going the vet. I'm taking
Four
Trevor
for
Lawrence here.
four.
I am. And really, I was trying to look at this and it feels like Trevor Lawrence has been in the NFL for forever at this point. But then I'm looking at Cam Ward and him. It's like they're 2 years apart. Like Cam Ward played some extra years of college there.
Yeah.
Like they're only 2 years apart. And for me, I think this is more so not a huge amount of confidence in Trevor Lawrence, but I think just enough worry about Cam Ward in that situation there in Tennessee for me. I've kind of been fading Calvin Ridley and I've been fading Cam Ward in best ball drafts this year and kind of haven't drafted a lot of Cam Ward. I don't think I have a single share in any of my dynasty leagues
Oh,
either. It's
wow.
just a player that I haven't really got in on. So I think the bet for me with Trevor Lawrence is really a bet on Liam Cohen. It's not necessarily a bet on Trevor Lawrence himself. We saw Liam Cohen help Baker Mayfield finish as a top 5 quarterback in fantasy last year in 2024. And then, their new GM Gladstone comes in, talks about how they kind of want to beef this up and get a better offense. Cohen is only talking about the offensive side of the football for the most part because he's an offensive guy. And then all of the moves that they make, Travis Hunter, obviously he's the defensive side of the ball too, but they want the wide receiver to go with Brian Thomas Jr. They add Bashal Tutin. They go get Diami Brown. They add 2 offensive linemen here to help beef up the interior of that line. I think they're really trying to improve this offensive system. And I think what a lot of people also don't recognize, and maybe it's just a little bit of the under the radar type of move as well, is they brought in OC Grant Udinsky. He is a ex Kevin O'Connell disciple. So, my Minnesota Vikings, I gotta throw my guy Grant in there, but that's a good sign because he has been around that quarterback development. It's like that magic dust that Kevin O'Connell has had with all of these quarterbacks over the last couple of years. So at least he's going to be in the building. You have Liam Cohen. I'm hoping the offensive weapons there with Hunter and Travis. Thomas. I hope they just bring the best out of Trevor Lawrence here right now. So I'm going to take the shot there. I'm just not sold on Cam Ward's situation, and I don't know if he is the type of quarterback that's going to elevate everybody else around him, or if he needs a little bit of help to get there. So I'm going to go Trevor.
I wanted to disagree, but I'm with you. We're very vet heavy so
Really?
far on this video, but I think that also says a little something. I think even though these guys, for the most part, most of these vets that I put in here have the lower ADP of the two guys, it kind of shows you like it's just tough to really count on the rookies unless you're all in on a player, unless you truly believe in a player. We've seen it to some extent with all of these guys. There's less mystery, there's less risk involved. You're really having to project a lot with these rookies, and it makes it a little more problematic at times. But that's also when you get the big booms. You could get these guys that right now, seeing Cam Ward at quarterback 16, sure, that sounds about right. But a year from now, he could be quarterback 22, or he could be quarterback 8. And I don't think that would shock anybody. So that's your risk reward potential there with guys like that. So let's move on. Oh, and by the way, I was with you, Trevor Lawrence as well. Let's move to the tight end spot here. We've got Colston Loveland, tight end 5, or TJ Hockenson, tight end 7.
Yeah, and I said Downs was one of the toughest. This was the toughest for me.
Okay.
And the reason why is, and I hate for it to sound kind of like a cop-out answer, but really based on how my draft is going at this point in time, if I'm a little bit younger and I'm playing for the future based off of those first couple of rounds of draft picks, I'm going Loveland. But in a bubble, most of the time I am trying to build a roster that can come out and play right away. And so because of that, I'm going with the vet in TJ Hockenson. In my rankings right now, I'm a little bit lower than consensus, I think, on Colston Loveland. I think the community has Loveland as a top 5 guy already for the most part. I currently have Colston Loveland as my tight end 7. TJ Hockenson is my tight end 4. Now, the reason why I said that I
By
would...
the way, that's my exact same rankings. That's
Is it
hilarious.
really? Is it
It
really?
is.
That's
Yep.
awesome. Okay, well, I think for me, really, it's like the reason why I said the draft being a dictator for where I would go is because Colston Loveland's 21 years old. TJ Hockenson's 28. Now, really tight end longevity, I don't think it is really something that we should be worried about for the most part, because oftentimes we've seen these elite tight ends that can produce through the age of 32, 33, 34. We've seen Kelsey's, Kittle's, all of these guys that go out and, have productive seasons late. So Hockenson, to me, he's still a guy that if you're playing in 2 to 3 year windows, which is probably what you should be playing, you're going to have some elite years here where you can rely on TJ Hockenson. Last year was not great for Hockenson. It was that recovery year from that gruesome injury that he had in 2023. I just feel like, the last healthy season that we can look upon and look at, he averaged 14.6 fantasy points per game. He was a tight end 1 in over 60% of the games that he played in. And that was a top 6 tight end, not even just a top 12. He was a top 6 tight end in 60% of those games. So I think Kevin O'Connell trusts him. They use him a lot in the short area in that red zone. I think a younger quarterback in JJ McCarthy is going to lean on a guy like TJ Hockenson. They've been working out a lot in the offseason so far. And you can look at that situation and say it's a little bit crowded, yes, with Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson. But I'll tell you what, TJ Hockenson is more established as a receiving threat right now than Colston Loveland. And Colston Loveland has Luther Burden, DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, and some other guys like Cole Kmet in that tight end room as well. So if I'm looking for high floor, high ceiling, for me, it's TJ Hockenson. Yes, you're drafting a little bit of an older player, but for the most part, I still think we have 3-4 years maybe potentially of some really, really good tight end numbers from TJ Hockenson.
So we have been very, very vet heavy on this episode, and you heard me mention my rankings are actually identical, which is kind of a surprise there. I do have Hockenson as my tight end 4 at this point, and it's because we're seeing all of these tight ends, George Kittle, Travis Kelce, still be very effective late into their careers. We saw a lot of the other really good ones be able to do that too, guys like Jason Witten and Tony Gonzalez and Antonio Gates. Like, this is not a rare sight to see these guys play into their mid-30s. So a 28-year-old, there's still tons of time for him to be an effective fantasy football asset. And it's just such a good offense, such a friendly offense for these pass catchers. So last one here. Will we finally get a rookie out of you? Quinshon Judkins, running back 12, versus Josh Jacobs, running back 13. Who you taking, Andrew?
Well, would it surprise you if I said I'm going with Quinshon Judkins here? I'm going to take the
We
rookie.
got
I'm
one.
going to take the rookie. And look, 21 years old, Quinshon Judkins versus 27-year-old Josh Jacobs. That in
Yep.
itself is pretty much enough for me to make the decision there. In my rankings, RB12, Quinshon Judkins, RB14, Josh Jacobs. But Judkins, a player that I really liked coming out of college. You know, a bigger back, can take on that large workload at the NFL level. Great between the tackles. I think underrated in the receiving game as well. And you probably know this, Garrett, but Cleveland only brought in one running back for a top 30 visit during their entire draft process. That guy was Quinshon Judkins, and then they used heavy draft capital, kind of basically day one draft capital for the most part on a guy like Quinshon Judkins. I think he's going to see volume very early. Dylan Sampson's a guy that I think is still going to be involved a little bit, but I think you guys are probably going to end up using him like Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. It feels like that's kind of the way that that's
Yep.
going to be. And Judkins is going to be a very, very, very good player for a long time. One of the stickiest stats, or I guess one of the most predictive stats for looking at running back success when translating from college to the NFL is rushing touchdowns. And Quinshon Judkins had 45 rushing touchdowns in 3 years of college. So I think he has an elite red zone profile. Every time you guys get into that red zone or the Browns get into the red zone, I'm saying you guys, you being the Ohio and the Browns fan, but
Sure.
every time the Browns, get into the end zone or into the red zone, they're going to be leaning on Quinshon Judkins. So maybe a rough year one. The only thing I'm really, worried about for the most part is the efficiencies here as a rookie. But we're playing Dynasty fantasy football, and at 21 years old, you're going to get a long shelf life. And if the Browns are bad, maybe they're looking at a top 10 type of quarterback next year instead of the guys that they have on the roster right now.
Absolutely. I echo a lot of what you said. I ended up going with the rookie running back as well. So I am 2 rookies to 4 vets. You ended up 1 to 5, but we agreed for the most part on all of them except the very first one. And Quinshon Judkins, for me, my only concern, you talked about efficiency. I could see that as well. For me, it's the receiving volume. Cleveland isn't necessarily known to involve their running backs a ton in the passing game. And even though I think Quinshon Judkins is able to do it, he's not a De'Von Achane. He's not a, one of these elite pass catching type running backs. So I do worry that maybe he won't get that type of receiving volume like some other running backs are going to get. But I still think he's going to be a very effective asset. They're going to do enough on the ground. He's going to get in the red zone and he's going to score some touchdowns. So I love it. So Andrew, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Dynasty Nerds YouTube show and looking at vets versus rookies. Anything you want to tell the good folks out there, where they can find you, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, thank you for having me. It's kind of fun because this is a full circle. Like I said, not too many years ago, I was just a guy that was consuming all of the content, not making the content, and you guys were one of the go-to sources that I was going to. So it's kind of full circle, being here in this room today. So I appreciate it. If people that are listening to this and watching this want to catch some of my content as well, you can find me over at the League FFB on YouTube. That's where all of the content is at. We do a little bit of everything. I talk some redraft in season, do some best ball drafts every once in a while, but we are Dynasty fantasy football year round. So that is kind of where I have my deepest love in fantasy football is Dynasty. So that's really what we like to talk about. So if you like any of those things, come find me over there at the League FFB on YouTube, or if you want to come kind of find me on Twitter and talk some trash on Twitter with me, maybe on Sundays when my Vikings are beating the Packers, at Andrew Tutru is probably where you can find me there.
Awesome. Well, appreciate you guys tuning in. We have tons of content continuing to come out. So make sure you've subscribed, you've liked all of those regular things, and we'll see you guys next time.